My name is Marianne Leland. I'm 67. Sunday dinners at my son's house had become habit polite, predictable, the kind of gathering that kept appearances intact. Caleb liked to say it gave us family balance. I smiled at that, though the only balance I felt anymore was the careful weight of pretending everything was fine. The house smelled of rosemary and lemon, too fragrant to be casual. Renee moved through the kitchen like a hostess in a commercial perfect hair smile, polished to a shine. When she saw me, she wiped her hands on a towel and kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp and citrusy. "We're so glad you could come, Marianne. Caleb's carving the chicken now." The dining room gleamed. Every plate, every fork, every folded napkin stood at attention. My grandsons sat across from me, Eli quiet, and long-limbed Mason restless and sweet. Caleb poured the wine, movement smooth but taut, the kind you make when you're managing nerves. I'd barely touched my fork when my phone vibrated in my purse. A single buzz. Silence. Then another. I slid a hand beneath the tablecloth, pretending to look for a tissue. The glow of the screen lit my palm. Unknown number. Don't react. They're recording you. For a moment, I didn't breathe. The words glared up like a flame. I blinked once, placed the phone face down in my lap, and smiled toward Renee. "Dinner smells wonderful," I said. Her head tilted. "I'm glad. I used the recipe you sent." Her voice carried that thin edge between warmth and warning. Caleb's hand brushed the wine glass. A drop spilled onto the white linen. Renee caught it with a napkin before he could. "It's fine," she murmured a little too fast. Eli looked up, caught my eye, and froze. For half a heartbeat, something urgent flickered there, fear or guilt, and then it was gone. He lowered his gaze, breaking a piece of bread between shaking fingers. The room tightened. Even the air seemed to listen. I kept my hands steady, folding my napkin the way I used to when a classroom went tense before a confession. "So, Mom," Caleb said, at last, clearing his throat. "How's the garden still green?" I said. "Your father's tomato patch never stood a chance without me." Normally, that joke would soften him, but tonight, his smile stayed flat. The silence afterward was thick enough to taste. Renee filled it. "You know, Marianne, you should think about moving closer to us. The house must feel big with just you now. I like the space," I said, "and the quiet." She laughed too high. "Of course. Still, it might be safer to have family nearby." Her tone dripped sugar, but every syllable landed heavy. Mason dropped his spoon, the clatter making me jump. "Sorry, Grandma." "It's fine," I whispered. My pulse thudded in my ears. Somewhere above the faint hum of an appliance or something else whirred on. Renee served dessert. I barely tasted it. Every gesture, every glance felt scripted, as if we were all performing for invisible eyes. I forced small talk about my students and their misused idioms. Renee laughed too hard. Caleb stared at his plate. Eli kept his head down, shoulders tight. When the meal ended, Renee began clearing dishes. Caleb followed. I stayed seated, pretending to admire the tulips in the vase at the table's center, bright, fresh, perfectly angled toward the chairs. Eli stood. "I'll grab my homework," he muttered, and slipped down the hall. Renee's laughter rose from the kitchen, brittle and bright. Caleb murmured something back. The sound of running water masked a mechanical click from somewhere near the mantel. I told myself it was the air vent. I stood and smoothed my skirt. "Thank you for dinner, Renee. The chicken was lovely." "You're leaving already?" Caleb asked, stepping out with damp hands. "Early class tomorrow," I said. "You know how they are when I'm late." He nodded, though the look he gave me felt like surveillance, not affection. "Drive safe, Mom." Outside, the night was heavy with magnolia. Porch lights glowed up and down the street, quiet guardians of other people's peace. I walked to my car, aware of every creak in the driveway. Inside, doors locked, I pulled out the phone. The message waited like a bruise that refused to fade. Don't react. They're recording you. Then another line appeared, same number. We'll explain later. Please act normal. The letter E at the end. I stared at it until the words blurred. Behind me, Caleb's windows glowed with amber light, the silhouettes moving slowly inside. Someone in that house had been watching me. For how long, I didn't know. I started the car, hands steady on the wheel, and drove into the dark stretch of road that led home, each streetlight flickering past like the blink of an unseen eye. I came back the next Sunday because pretending was safer than avoiding. Pretending meant control. Caleb greeted me at the door with the same polite warmth he used with clients. He looked thinner or maybe just tired, his collar slightly wilted, despite the crisp shirt. Behind him, Renee's voice floated from the kitchen light, cheerful, just a little too practiced. Marianne. We're so glad you made it, she said, appearing with a dish towel slung over one shoulder. Her smile was bright enough to sting. Sit, please. We just finished setting the table. The dining room gleamed again, always spotless, always arranged. But now I saw it differently. The tulip vase in the center of the table no longer faced outward toward the window. The blossoms leaned toward the dining chairs, their stems angled, as if bowing to the guests. I took my usual seat and studied the vase for a moment too long. The glass caught the overhead light strangely, a small reflection near the neck, where a camera lens might be. I blinked, forcing my expression smooth. My hands folded neatly in my lap. Renee poured tea. You'll love the roast tonight, she said. It's your favorite cut. How thoughtful, I replied. My voice sounded steady, but I felt my pulse in my throat. Eli entered quietly, his phone clutched in his hand. He glanced at me just a flicker and sat beside his younger brother. The boy chattered about a school project. Eli didn't speak. I noticed his knee bouncing under the table. Caleb served the meat, careful slices, precise. Mom, how's your class? Lively, I said. They're learning past tense this week. It's tricky, but they'll get there. Renee laughed softly. You're so patient. I don't know how you still do it at your age. At my age, I echoed with a smile that didn't touch my eyes. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and liked it that way. Her tone stayed sugar smooth, but every word had edges. As the meal went on, I became aware of how the clock above the fireplace had been turned. It no longer faced the hallway, it faced me. Its brass frame gleamed under the chandelier, the reflection landing squarely on my plate. I kept my movements deliberate, cutting, chewing, sipping. I told a short story about one of my students mispronouncing bought as boat, and everyone laughed, everyone except Eli, who stared at his napkin jaw tight. When the laughter died down, Renee tilted her head. Have you thought about getting one of those home assistants? You know, the kind that reminds you of appointments, takes notes? What are they called? Devices that listen, I said lightly. I prefer my privacy. Her smile faltered. Oh, of course. I just meant sometimes it's nice to have help. I manage, I said. The room felt too warm. The scent of rosemary clung to my clothes, heavy and perfumed. I caught Caleb watching me, his eyes flicking from my face to the clock, then away again. The fork slipped in my hand, the clink echoing too loudly. I rose before dessert, claiming a headache. Renee protested. Caleb half stood, as if to insist, but I was already gathering my purse. Eli lifted his eyes for the first time, and for that brief second, his expression broke fear. Guilt, something that didn't belong on a boy's face. "I'll call tomorrow," I told them. "Thank you for dinner." Renee kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp as citrus. Caleb walked me to the door, fingers tightening around the handle. "Everything okay, Mom?" "Of course," I said. "Everything's perfect." Outside, dusk had settled over the street. The light spilling from their windows felt colder than the air. I drove home slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror more than once. When I parked, I didn't go inside right away. Through the windshield, I could see my own living room window glowing faintly, the lamp I'd left on waiting for me. The house looked peaceful, ordinary, but I knew peace could be a disguise, and I wasn't sure who it was pretending for anymore. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, too quiet for evening. I hung my keys on the hook, the clink echoing sharp against the stillness. The faint scent of lavender lingered from the candle I'd blown out before dinner, sweet, but stale, like a memory overstaying its welcome. Everything looked untouched. Books aligned, curtains, half-drawn, clock ticking steadily. Perfectly normal. I set my purse on the table and emptied it, wallet, glasses, lipstick I rarely used. At the bottom lay a folded square of notebook paper, creased and soft from handling. I didn't remember putting it there. I unfolded it. "Grandma, they put cameras in your house. Please act normal. I'll explain soon." At the bottom, smaller, "I'm sorry." The handwriting was Eli's, slanted, rushed, unmistakably his. My first instinct was disbelief, but the note's urgency felt too real, too exact. I read it again, slower, the words sinking like stones. Cameras. The thought sliced through me. I looked toward the living room, the clock on the mantel, the vase by the window, the smoke detector above the doorway. Each object now felt alive, aware as though it were looking back. I moved through the rooms quietly, every step deliberate. The air seemed heavier, charged with presence. The faint hum I'd once dismissed near the fireplace came back to me now with terrible clarity. In the kitchen, the ceramic rooster on the refrigerator caught the light. Daniel had given it to me years ago, its chipped comb a familiar comfort. Now it seemed different, foreign, like something that had been touched when I wasn't watching. I pressed my palms to the counter until the tremor in my hands subsided. Humiliation burned hotter than fear. Every private moment, every sigh, every whispered memory suddenly felt stolen. If Eli knew, it meant he'd been carrying this secret too. The note wasn't just warning, it was confession. I folded the paper back into its small square and slipped it into my pocket. Passing the hallway photo of Caleb and Eli at the pier, I felt a twist in my chest. Their smiles had once looked genuine. Now they seemed like masks. In my bedroom, the air felt metallic, almost listening. I slid the note beneath To Kill a Mockingbird in my nightstand and turned off the lamp. Darkness pressed close, unblinking. Then came a faint click, soft, deliberate, mechanical. I lay still, pulse drumming in my ears. The note's truth settled cold and absolute. I wasn't alone in my own home. I didn't sleep that night. I waited for dawn, lying perfectly still, eyes fixed on the faint red digits of the clock. The house breathed around me, creaks in the ceiling, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of air through the vents. Every sound felt rehearsed, as though it was covering for something else. When the first light slipped through the curtains, I rose quietly. If Eli's note was true, I needed to know. Not to confront, not yet, just to see. The kitchen felt colder than usual. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and waited for the whistle that never came. My hands itched for something to do, so I opened the drawer where I kept the small step stool. Years of teaching had given me a certain patience. Years of widowhood had taught me precision. I started in the hallway. The smoke detector was a newer model than I remembered, sleeker, with a small circular opening near the battery latch. I climbed the stool and twisted the cover. Inside, next to the 9-volt battery, a pinhole glinted like an eye. I froze. It was so small I could have missed it forever. A black lens no bigger than a shirt button hidden in plain sight. My stomach dropped. I reattached the cover with careful fingers, leaving it exactly as I'd found it. In the living room, I moved to the lamp by the window. Daniel's favorite spot, the one where he used to read after dinner. I ran my fingers along the base and felt the faintest ridge, a seam that didn't belong. I tilted it toward the morning light, and there it was again, a hole, subtle, cleanly drilled facing the sofa. I stood very still, the air pressing against me. Each discovery peeled away something I hadn't realized I still owned: privacy, dignity, the quiet belief that my home was mine. I took out my phone, snapped a photo, then placed the lamp exactly as it had been. If Eli was warning me to act normal, then I would. I'd spent 40 years grading essays, watching students bluff and cheat with trembling hands. Deception was a language I spoke fluently. By the time the sun reached the back windows, I'd found 3 more. One, hidden in the vent above the bathroom mirror, another behind the face of the mantel clock, and a final one, disguised within the porcelain rooster atop the refrigerator, the one Daniel had given me on our 30th anniversary. Its cheerful red comb had always made me smile. Now it made me sick. Each lens stared back at me, silent and unblinking. I stood in the center of the kitchen and tried to breathe. For months, maybe longer, they had watched me cook, read, sleep, undress. The thought crawled through me like ice water. I wanted to rip every camera from the walls, to smash them until nothing remained. Instead, I opened the drawer by the sink and pulled out my small camera, the old Nikon Daniel had bought before our last vacation. My fingers remembered its weight, the smooth click of the shutter. I began to take photographs. The smoke detector, the lamp, the vent, the clock, the rooster. Each image framed carefully, time-stamped, cataloged in my mind. If they wanted footage, I'd give them better evidence. When I was done, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table as though nothing had happened. My reflection in the dark window looked older than it had yesterday, eyes hollow, shoulders rigid, but my hands were steady around the mug. At noon, I showered, dressed, and made a deliberate show of watering the plants by the window. I even hummed softly an old tune Daniel loved. If the cameras were still running, let them record that. It was strange realizing that rage could sit so quietly beneath the skin. Not the wild, shouting kind, but the cold, precise version that builds purpose out of violation. I spent the rest of the afternoon making a list in my notebook. Not of suspects, though I knew who they were, but of what still belonged to me. The deed, the bank accounts, my pension. I wrote them down one by one in neat columns. Each line steadied me. Outside, a car drove past, slowly pausing near the driveway before moving on. My pulse jumped, but I didn't move to the window. Instead, I kept writing my pen, pressing deep into the paper. By evening, the house glowed warm again, lamps-lit curtains drawn. To anyone watching, I was just another old woman keeping her routines. But now I knew better. I rinsed my cup, wiped the counter, and stood for a long time in the quiet. The cameras were still there, blinking invisibly in the dark, but I no longer felt like prey. If they were watching, then they were documenting their own crime, and one day soon, I'd make sure every second of it was seen. By Monday morning, I had a plan. Not revenge, not yet, but control. If they wanted to prove I was losing my mind, I'd give them the opposite of performance so flawless it would trap them in their own lie. I started with routine. At 6:00 a.m., I brewed coffee and wrote the date in a new leather-bound notebook. I titled the first page Daily Log, Cognitive and Financial Record. The words looked clinical, detached, but that was the point. Each morning, I wrote what I ate, what time I took my medication, every errand, every expense. Every thought that could sound like rational judgment found its place on paper. By mid-morning, I walked to the community library for my ESL class. The students, mostly women from Brazil, Vietnam, and Morocco, greeted me with warm smiles that felt more real than anything I'd seen in weeks. Teaching grounded me. Verb conjugations, pronunciation drills, the laughter when someone said sheet wrong and blushed, it reminded me that my voice still belonged to me. After class, I stopped by the cafe across the street. I made sure to pay with my debit card, saving the receipt. Every transaction, every conversation became evidence. Renee could call it paranoia if she wanted. I called it preparation. In the afternoons, I joined the neighborhood book club again. They'd started The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich, and when I volunteered to host next month's meeting, the women looked pleasantly surprised. I made jokes. I smiled. I said yes to things I'd been too tired to do for months. On the surface, I was blooming. Inside, I was taking notes. Every evening, I filmed myself on the small camcorder Daniel and I used to take on road trips. Nothing dramatic, just me cooking dinner, balancing my checkbook, reading aloud from a novel. The recordings went onto a flash drive labeled Wellness Archive. Sometimes, while I cooked, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, the same kitchen that hid a camera in the rooster's head. I smiled toward that spot, slow and deliberate. Still here, I whispered once. Still thinking clearly. The days began to take on rhythm again, but underneath the normalcy ran a current of quiet defiance. Each bill paid on time, each class taught, each thoughtful entry in my diary wasn't just routine, it was defense. Proof of life. Proof of mind. At night, I sat on the porch with my tea, reading over my notes by lamplight. The notebook grew heavier each day. Pages filled with neat handwriting receipts paper-clipped to the margins, timestamps aligned like soldiers. They thought they were writing my story for me, editing my reality through hidden lenses. But now I was the one keeping the record. And when the time came, every word, every entry, every calm, deliberate moment would be my weapon. Chapter 6. Paper Trails and Signatures. It started with a single line on a bank statement. Tuesday morning sunlight spilled across my kitchen table over neat stacks of receipts, color-coded folders and envelopes I'd been avoiding. I had been organizing my new proof of sanity, as Patricia jokingly called it, everything in order, everything accounted for. Outside, the sound of children walking to school drifted in a reminder that life went on normally somewhere. Then I saw it. Authorized proxy, Caleb Leland, temporary access. The words didn't make sense at first. Maybe I'd signed something years ago, back when Daniel handled the finances. But the date was recent, 6 weeks ago, right around the time Darren Lowe, Renee's brother, began showing up at family dinners with his too bright smile and casual questions about my future plans. The coffee in my cup went cold. I opened the next envelope, my retirement account. I'd never shared those details with anyone. Yet at the bottom, under correspondence authorization, was Darren's name listed as witness. I read line by line, forcing myself not to skim. Beneficiary update pending, power of attorney draft received. Each phrase chipped away at my breath. This wasn't an error, it was a plan. I spread the papers across the table, arranging them by account, checking, savings, pension. Caleb's name appeared again and again, tucked neatly beside forged versions of mine. Renee's handwriting filled in the witness fields, tidy and unshakably confident. My throat tightened. Safer to have family nearby, she'd said that night, smiling as if she meant it. The kettle clicked off. I poured water I didn't need just to steady my hands. My reflection in the window looked foreign calm on the surface, cold underneath. They were building a cage out of paper. I gathered everything into a manila folder and labeled it in block letters, "Financial Anomalies." Then I called the bank. The woman who answered spoke kindly until she checked my account. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "There's a proxy authorization on file your son Caleb. It's accompanied by a medical attestation signed by Darren Lowe." The word attestation hung in the air like smoke. Darren wasn't a doctor. He was a fraud in a tailored suit. When I hung up, I felt stripped raw. Humiliation burned, but anger cooled it fast. I opened my filing cabinet and checked every document I'd signed that year. On one insurance renewal, Caleb's forged signature mirrored mine almost perfect, but the loop on the L was wrong. Daniel had once said my signature moved like music. This one didn't know the rhythm. By noon, the dining table looked like a battlefield of ink and paper. I photographed each page, stored it in a hidden folder titled Truth, and exhaled for the first time in hours. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, steady as ever. I looked straight at it, knowing what hid inside. "If you're watching," I said quietly, "watch closely. Because from this moment on, I wasn't the one being studied. I was the one collecting evidence." Forsyth Park was still bright with afternoon light when I spotted Eli sitting on the far bench, his backpack slouched at his feet. The fountain sprayed behind him, catching rainbows in the mist. Children played near the swings, their laughter drifting through the magnolia-scented air. To anyone passing, we were just a grandmother and grandson, meeting after school. He didn't look up when I sat beside him. His hands were clenched around something small. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of cicadas filled the space between us, loud and relentless. "Did anyone see you leave?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "I told Mom I had study group." His voice was thin, the words trembling at the edges. Then he looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear that didn't belong to a child. "Grandma, they're doing things to make you look different, confused." My breath caught. "How do you know?" He unzipped his backpack and pulled out a small blue flash drive wrapped in tissue. "I copied some stuff from Dad's computer. I couldn't keep watching them talk about you like that." I took the flash drive, my fingers brushing his. It was warm, as if it had a pulse. "What kind of stuff, Eli? Videos? Messages?" "Uncle Darren sent clips to Mom. He's been editing them, making it look like you forget things, like you leave the stove on." His voice cracked. "It's not true. I've seen you. You're fine." I looked away, focusing on the children's voices, the fountain's steady rhythm. My heart hurt in a way I hadn't known it could. Not from betrayal, though that was there too, but from knowing my grandson had been living with this knowledge, silent and terrified. How long, I asked. Months. They said it's for your own good, that you can't live alone anymore. But then I saw the emails Dad and Uncle Darren talking about selling the house after they get power of attorney. They already met with a realtor. The words landed like stones. I turned the flash drive in my hand. It was small enough to lose, yet heavy with truth. "Why bring this to me, Eli? You know what they'll do if they find out. I couldn't let them keep lying." His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. "You're the only person who's ever believed in me, Grandma. I couldn't just pretend." The wind shifted, scattering leaves across the path. I wanted to hug him, but I didn't. Someone might be watching. Instead, I said, "You did the right thing. But from now on, you have to act like nothing happened. Can you do that?" He nodded quickly. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'll figure it out." I've been underestimated before. He tried to smile, but his mouth trembled. I hate them for this. No, I said softly. You hate what they're doing. That's different. We sat in silence for a while. A jogger passed. A couple walked their dog. The world went on unaware that 2 lives on a park bench had just changed direction. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket. Go home, Eli. Don't tell anyone we met. And keep your phone with you always. He nodded again, then stood and pulled me into a quick, desperate hug. I held him tightly long enough to let him know he wasn't alone. When he left, his figure grew smaller against the setting sun, his shoulders hunched under a weight no teenager should carry. I sat there until the park lights flickered on, watching the fountain glow white against the dusk. My hand brushed the pocket where the flash drive rested, cool, now silent. They thought they could rewrite my story with edits and signatures. But they'd forgotten one thing: truth leaves traces. And now I had proof. By the next morning, I'd decided where to go. There were only a few people left in Savannah I could trust, and Patricia Odell was one of them. She had been Daniel's estate lawyer, the woman who'd guided me through every signature after his death when I could barely lift a pen. Sharp-minded, discreet, and utterly unshakable. Her office sat downtown in a weathered brick building that smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. I waited in the hallway before stepping inside the blue flash drive heavy in my pocket. When Patricia saw me through the glass door, she smiled the same way she always had, professional warmth, no pity. "Marianne," she said, rising from her desk. "It's been too long. Come in." I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap. "I need you to see something," I said. My voice didn't tremble, but I could feel the effort it took to keep it steady. I handed her the flash drive. "What's on it? Proof," I said. "Of what my family's planning." She studied me for a moment, then plugged the drive into her computer without another word. The screen lit up folders labeled videos, texts, documents. Patricia clicked one at random. The first clip showed me in my kitchen opening drawers looking for my tea strainer. My voice was absent. The footage had been muted. The timestamp blinked in the corner. She played another me standing by the stove, the flame flickering. The camera angle came from the corner above the fridge, the ceramic rooster's perspective. In this version, the clip looped cutting before I turned off the burner. Patricia leaned forward, her expression tightening. "This has been edited." "There's more," I said quietly. She clicked through the folder's screenshots of messages between Caleb Renee and Darren Lowe. "We need more footage showing confusion. Edit out her explanations. Deadline before POA filing." When she reached the folder labeled Finances, she exhaled slowly. Documents scrolled past, forms bearing my forged signature, bank transfers, prepared but not yet sent, a property sale agreement, awaiting medical confirmation. Patricia turned off the monitor. For a long time she didn't speak. Then she said, "They're not just greedy. They're criminal." The words hung between us like a verdict. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I thought I was losing my mind, Patricia." Then I realized that's exactly what they wanted. Her eyes softened, but her tone stayed steady. "You're not losing anything, Marianne. You're ahead of them." She opened a drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "We'll need to document everything. The hidden cameras, the financial changes, the falsified forms. I'll bring in a forensic tech and a private investigator quietly, at first. If they're planning to file for guardianship or power of attorney, we stop them before they have a chance." I nodded, my hands still clasped the calm mask, never slipping. "What do I do until then?" "Act normal," she said. "Don't let them suspect you know. Keep your routines. Keep your diary. Keep smiling. And gather proof, every letter, every transaction, every conversation. If you can keep the cameras running, The footage they think incriminates you might just expose them. She tore a sheet from the pad and slid it across the desk. Here's what we'll need in order verification from the bank property record. Requests a statement from your doctor confirming mental capacity. The cleaner your paper trail, the harder it'll be for them to twist it. Her precision steadied me. There was something about Patricia's composure, unflinching, almost surgical, that made the chaos in my head start to align. I asked quietly, "And if they realize what we're doing?" She gave a thin smile. Then we moved faster. I left the office with a folder of instructions, her business card tucked inside my pocket, next to the flash drive. The afternoon sun felt too bright, the city too loud. Every face on the sidewalk looked like a witness to something I hadn't yet done. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking, not from fear but from restraint. I gripped the steering wheel and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back was calm, composed, professional. Exactly what she needed to be. Patricia was right. For now, performance was protection. But beneath that practiced calm fury had begun to gather slow, deliberate, unstoppable. And when the time came, it would speak for itself. By the end of the week, I had learned how to perform again. It felt like stepping back into a classroom after summer break. Same tools, same rhythm. Except this time, the lesson was my life. Every movement had purpose now. Every word a line in the script. I refused to let them write for me. I started with the small things. Each morning, I opened the curtains wide so the light fell evenly across the room. I made breakfast by the window, eggs, toast, and coffee, narrating the steps as I went. 2 slices of bread, lightly buttered, the stove off, the plate set. My voice was steady, natural, like a teacher explaining a task to beginners. I wasn't sure if the microphones could pick up sound, but I wanted them to hear me think clearly. When I paid bills, I did it aloud, power company due on the 15th, paid electronically. I spoke each number as I typed it, my tone calm and precise. Then I filed the receipt in a labeled folder, making sure the gesture was visible to whatever hidden lens might be watching. At first, the act felt humiliating, living for an audience I couldn't see. But soon it became armor. The more deliberate I became, the less room there was for them to twist anything. I was building a record they couldn't edit away. At the library, I threw myself into teaching. My ESL students, mostly women in their 30s and 40s, noticed my sudden energy. "You are happier, Mrs. Leland," one of them said with a grin. I smiled. "Let's say I've found my voice again." We practiced verbs that day: to plan, to protect, to prove. I made them repeat the conjugations until the words filled the room. The irony didn't escape me. After class, I stopped by the market and chatted with the cashier, an older man named Clarence, who always asked about my garden. I made sure to use my debit card, kept the receipt, and smiled at the security camera above the register. Paper trails and witnesses, they were my insurance now. At home, I kept up appearances for the hidden audience. I watered the plants, humming softly. I read aloud from a novel at the kitchen table. I even watched the local news at 6 o'clock sharp, responding out loud to the headlines, so my awareness would sound unmistakable. One afternoon, while pruning the azaleas by the porch, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked calm, maybe too calm. Her smile was composed, her eyes alert. I realized I was no longer pretending. This act had become real. Every careful motion, every rehearsed phrase was proof of survival. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all pressed hard against my chest. At night, when the house went quiet and the lamps cast their long shadows, I sometimes caught myself glancing toward the ceiling, wondering which corner held the next secret lens. It wasn't fear that kept me awake anymore. It was fury, a slow, coiled kind that burned cold. I kept my promise to Patricia: no confrontation, no sudden moves. The investigator she'd hired was already tracing the forged documents and surveillance equipment. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed them to believe I was exactly what they claimed I wasn't lucid, capable, aware. So I leaned into the role. When Renee called on Sunday to invite me to dinner, I accepted without hesitation. My voice was light, cheerful. "I'll bring dessert," I said. I could almost hear the surprise in her silence. That evening, I baked an apple pie, every slice of fruit, measured every step, deliberate. The aroma filled the kitchen, warm and sharp, like memory. Before placing the pie on the counter to cool, I looked up at the smoke detector, the one I hadn't removed. I smiled at it, steady and slow. "Good night," I said, as though to an audience that thought it knew my ending. Then I turned off the lights, leaving the house bathed in the soft hum of its watchers. Renee called on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something wrapped in politeness. "Marianne, could you come by Sunday? It's our anniversary. Just a small dinner. I thought maybe you could help with the boys while Caleb and I go out for a bit." I smiled into the phone, though my pulse ticked in my throat. Of course. I'd love to. The next few days passed in careful rhythm. I taught at the library, wrote in my diary, kept my tone even when Patricia called with updates about the investigator's progress. The web around me was nearly mapped now. Every forged signature, every hidden lens, every falsified report. All that was left was proof of intent. Sunday came bright and humid. I arrived with a store-bought cheesecake and a bouquet of lilies. Renee greeted me in a dress too elegant for an evening at home, her smile stretched tight. Caleb appeared behind her tie, crooked expression dull from nerves. "Dinner's in the oven," Renee said. "We won't be long." The boys were in the living room. Eli gave me a quick, meaningful glance before turning back to help Mason build a Lego fort. His face was calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew what today was. Renee and Caleb left at 6:30, their goodbyes rehearsed. I waited until their car disappeared down the street before exhaling. The house settled into silence. I tucked Mason into bed first, reading from his pirate book until his eyes closed. Then I found Eli in the hallway. "They left the office door open again," he whispered. "Dad's computer's on." I brushed his hair back gently. "Go lie down, sweetheart. I'll take care of it." He hesitated. "Be careful." The office smelled faintly of cologne and printer ink. The computer screen glowed with the family photo Caleb used as wallpaper, a picture from 2 summers ago at Tybee Island, everyone smiling against a blue sky that now looked artificial. I sat at the desk and slid the flash drive Patricia had given me into the port. My hands didn't shake. Folders opened easily, one after another. The first contained the edited videos, hundreds of them. Clips of me searching drawers, standing by the stove, misplacing my keys. Each file was labeled, meticulously tagged by date, altered by Darren Lowe. The second folder held something worse, a fabricated medical assessment signed by a clinic I'd never visited. Words like diminished awareness and episodes of disorientation leapt off the page. At the bottom was Darren's signature, neat and confident, beside a falsified physician's seal. The third folder sealed everything. A property sale agreement. My address, my signature, forged so precisely it would have fooled anyone else. The sale price was half the home's value. The buyer's name was a shell company registered in Atlanta, and the closing date was set for next month. I copied every file to the flash drive, watching the progress bar crawl forward. When it reached 100%, I deleted the folder labeled Transfer History, then cleared the recent activity log. Every keystroke deliberate, every breath measured. Before leaving, I adjusted the chair exactly as I'd found, It wiped my fingerprints from the mouse and dimmed the screen. The office returned to its undisturbed stillness. In the hallway, I paused by Eli's door. He was lying awake, staring at the ceiling. "It's done," I whispered. He nodded, eyes glistening. "Are you scared?" "Not anymore." I kissed his forehead and pulled the blanket up to his chin. "Go to sleep. Everything's going to be fine." Back downstairs, I placed the cheesecake dish in the dishwasher and turned off the kitchen light. The smoke detector's tiny lens blinked faintly in the dark, still recording. I looked straight at it. "Good night," I said softly, "and thank you." Then I picked up my purse, locked the front door behind me, and stepped into the warm Savannah night. The flash drive rested in my pocket like a heartbeat, quiet, steady, alive. Each file, each signature, each false word was now mine to wield. As I drove home through the dim streets, I kept my face calm in the rearview mirror. If anyone was watching, they'd see only a tired woman heading home after helping her family. And that was exactly what I wanted them to see. Patricia called 2 days later. Her voice was clipped, but trembling with purpose. "We found someone," she said. "Her name's Lillian Pratt. 74. Lives out near Augusta. You need to hear what she has to say." By afternoon, we were on the road. Patricia drove, eyes steady behind her glasses, the kind of calm that hides urgency. I watched the landscape roll by the cypress trees, the rusted barns, the fields that blurred into memory. I'd taught in this part of Georgia once, decades ago. It felt cruelly fitting to return here, chasing the shadow of what my own life could have become. Lillian Pratt lived in a senior residence off a quiet county road, the kind built with good intentions but run on minimal funding. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. A nurse led us to a small day room where a woman sat near the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Ms. Pratt, Patricia," said gently. "I'm Patricia Odell, an attorney from Savannah. This is Mrs. Leland." Lillian turned her head slowly. Her hair was silver and cropped short. Her eyes, though clouded with age, still held a flicker of sharpness. "You said this is about Darren Lowe," she said, her voice thin but steady. Patricia nodded. "We believe he's trying something similar again, on another woman." "Mrs. Leland." Lillian's fingers clenched together. "He told me he was helping," she whispered. "Said it was just paperwork. For my protection." Patricia set a recorder on the table and pressed the red button. "Can you tell us what happened, Ms. Pratt?" She hesitated, eyes fixed on the reflection of the trees outside the window. Then slowly she began. "He was married to my granddaughter back then. Charming man. Brought me flowers when he visited. Said he was setting up a trust to keep my house safe in case I ever got sick. He handled everything, the notary, the signatures. I didn't understand half of it, but he said I didn't need to." Her voice wavered. "6 months later, I was in this place. He'd sold the house. Said it was for my medical expenses. I didn't even know until the checks stopped coming. By then, the house was gone, and he was divorced from my granddaughter." I felt the air leave my chest. The details lined up too neatly: the false trust, the power of attorney, the quiet isolation. He had done this before, and he'd perfected it. "Did anyone investigate?" Patricia asked softly. Lillian gave a tired laugh. "They said it was legal. I'd signed everything. My doctor said I seemed confused at the time. That was Darren's doing, too. He told her I was forgetful. Showed her edited videos of me repeating questions during family dinners. I wasn't confused. I was grieving. My husband had just died." Her hands shook, now trembling in her lap. "I tried to fight it, but no one believed me. By the time my daughter realized what happened, he was gone with the money." Patricia's pen scratched across her legal pad. Would you be willing to sign a statement? Lillian nodded the motion, small but resolute. If it helps another woman stop him, yes. We stayed for an hour recording her story in careful detail. She spoke slowly, stopping often to breathe, but her memory was clear: names, dates, amounts. Every word was another thread tying Darren's past to my present. When she finished, Patricia stopped the recorder. Thank you, Ms. Pratt. What you've shared will help more than you know. Lillian reached out her fingers, brushing mine. He'll do it again, she said quietly. Men like that always do, until someone stops them. Her words stayed with me the entire drive back to Savannah. Patricia kept her eyes on the road, the recorder on the dashboard between us. The red light had gone dark, but its presence filled the car like a heartbeat. As we passed the outskirts of the city, I thought about the house waiting for me. Every camera, every forged signature, every quiet act of betrayal. Lillian had lost everything before she realized what was happening. I still had a chance to keep mine. The sky had turned violet by the time we reached the riverfront. Patricia glanced at me. We'll transcribe this tonight, she said. Her testimony links the pattern. Once the investigator confirms the documents, it's over for them. I looked out at the darkening water, the lights of the city flickering against the tide. Not over, I said. Not yet. Because I understood now what Lillian's trembling voice had really meant. This wasn't just about money or property, it was about erasure. And I would not let them write me out of my own life. The first post appeared on a Thursday afternoon. A neighbor sent me a screenshot before I saw it myself. Renee had written on Facebook, "Watching someone you love slip away is the hardest thing. Please pray for my mother-in-law as we try to get her the help she needs." The words looked soft, even compassionate, until you read between the lines. The comments followed quickly. "So sorry, Renee. You're such a good daughter-in-law. She's lucky to have you." Within hours, Caleb added his own post. Sometimes doing what's right for family means making hard decisions. Mental decline is cruel, but we'll face it with love. It was like watching my life rewritten in real-time, pixel by pixel. They were building their narrative, laying the groundwork for when the papers would surface, the power of attorney, the sale. If I hadn't already seen the documents myself, I might have believed them. Patricia told me to stay silent. Every post they make digs their own hole deeper. Let them talk. I tried. I really did. But by Saturday morning, the lie had grown teeth. My phone buzzed with messages, friends from church parents of former students, even the librarian where I taught. Some were kind, others hesitant. "Are you all right? Maybe you should see someone. They're just worried about you, Marianne." I smiled through every conversation. "I'm perfectly fine," I said, and I was. The cameras I'd installed the week before confirmed it. 4 new ones, real ones, mounted at every entry. Unlike theirs, mine weren't hidden. The vandalism came the next night. I woke just before dawn to the sound of metal scraping against metal, a slow, deliberate noise, not the randomness of mischief. I looked out the window, but saw nothing but fog. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the sound had stopped. My car sat in the driveway, the headlights dimmed its silver surface, streaked with deep gouges. The words were scrawled across both doors in thick white spray paint. "Crazy old woman." I stood there barefoot, the concrete cold beneath my feet. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then the fury came steady and absolute. I went back inside, poured myself coffee, and opened the security app on my phone. The feed loaded slowly, the timestamp blinking 2:47 a.m. There she was, Renee. Hood pulled up paint can in one hand, keys in the other. She looked straight into the lens before she began. Her mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. She didn't hurry. She wanted me to see. I replayed the clip 3 times, each frame colder than the last. When I finally called Patricia, she answered on the first ring. "Send it to me," she said. Immediately. An hour later, the police were at my door. A young officer took photos, nodding grimly. "This is clear evidence, ma'am. You did the right thing installing cameras. I learned from the best," I said. He glanced at me, unsure whether I meant him or someone else. "We'll pick her up this morning. It's vandalism, destruction of property, and harassment, and if there's an existing complaint, we'll attach this to it." By noon, Renee was in custody. Caleb posted again that afternoon. "My wife made a terrible mistake. She's been under immense stress caring for my mother. Please respect our privacy." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The footage had already been sent to Patricia, to the investigator, and to the state licensing board handling Darren's case. That evening, I stood by the kitchen window, watching the new security lights bathe the driveway in white. My car looked battered, but proud, the words still visible under the first layer of cleaner proof carved in metal. For once, I didn't feel watched. I felt seen. They'd used cameras to trap me. Now those same eyes would tell the truth. It was a Thursday morning when I noticed it, small, almost invisible, the kind of detail only a teacher's eye would catch. The outlet near the hallway floor looked slightly crooked, its top edge tilting just a fraction off center. I knelt to inspect it, pressing my fingers against the faceplate. It felt newer than the others, smooth, unscuffed, recently installed. A faint red flicker winked from the corner when my shadow moved. I felt the air go still. I went to the kitchen, opened my notebook, and wrote the time, 10:14 a.m. Outlet near hallway suspicious. Then I called Patricia. By noon, 2 officers from the Savannah Police Department stood in my living room. One, Detective Ramos, was young but observant. He scanned the room with quiet focus. The other, older and heavier, carried a handheld receiver that buzzed faintly when he passed the outlet. "It's transmitting," Ramos said. "Live signal." He removed the faceplate with gloved hands, revealing a pinhole camera wired neatly into the wall. The lens reflected the light like a small, dark eye. My stomach clenched, not from fear this time, but from recognition. I had lived for months under the gaze of this silent witness, cooking, writing, sleeping, all under his watch. "Can you trace it?" Patricia asked, her voice controlled. Ramos nodded. "Already pinging the signal." "Shouldn't take long." I sat down on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in my lap. The house felt different now, not haunted but violated. The walls that had once felt safe were suddenly complicit. When Ramos returned 30 minutes later, his expression had hardened. "We found the feed," he said. "It's broadcasting to a private network, registered to a rental property across town. Leaseholder Caleb Leland." Patricia inhaled sharply, but I said nothing. The name didn't surprise me. Some part of me had known it all along. The next hours moved in fragments. The drive to the rental house, the flashing lights reflected in the windows, officers moving through the doorway. When they brought Caleb out, handcuffed and pale, I stayed in the car. Through the windshield, I saw his face turn toward me. He didn't speak, but his lips parted, forming a word that might have been Mom. I didn't wave. I didn't move. When they led him into the squad car, the door shut with a dull thud that echoed in my chest. I realized then that the line between mother and intruder had blurred long before this moment, and that reclaiming my home might mean losing my son forever. The DeSoto Hotel glittered that night like a cathedral built for hypocrisy. Strings of lights cascaded from the chandeliers, and the air smelled of money, perfume, and polite deceit. A banner above the stage read, "Leland and Lowe, Financial Honoring Family Values." I arrived alone. My dress was navy silk, understated but deliberate. On my collar, I pinned Daniel's sapphire brooch, the one he'd given me for our 25th anniversary. Its cool weight rested just over my heartbeat, steadying me. At the door, Caleb's assistant blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Leland, oh, I didn't realize you were attending." "Family values," I said evenly. "I thought it only right." Inside, Caleb stood near the podium, all confidence and charm. His suit was sharp, his smile effortless. To the room, he was the image of success, a devoted son, a pillar of integrity. But I saw the tension in his jaw, the shadow under his eyes. He hadn't spoken to me since the arrest, though the lawyers had made sure the charges were delayed under ongoing review. When he spotted me, his face faltered for half a second before snapping back into its public smile. Renee beside him squeezed his hand too tightly. Patricia sat near the back, her posture calm, her eyes alert. She nodded once when our gazes met. The flash drive rested in my clutch, labeled simply Legacy. The speeches began, corporate platitudes about integrity, responsibility, community. Darren Lowe took the microphone, talking about protecting what we love most. His voice oozed sincerity. I counted each breath, waiting. When it was Caleb's turn, the applause was warm, familiar. He thanked the crowd, praised his team, spoke about honoring the trust between generations. The irony was exquisite. Then he said, "Before we close, I'd like to acknowledge someone very dear to me, my mother." The spotlight turned. I stood slowly, the murmurs rising around the room. I crossed the floor to the stage heels, echoing like punctuation. Caleb stepped back to give me the mic, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, Caleb," I said. "It's kind of you to remember me tonight." I set my clutch on the podium, opened it, and slid the flash drive into the laptop connected to the projector. The screen behind us blinked to life. At first, it showed nothing but static, then split-screen footage. Me in my kitchen, the timestamp visible. The Rooster camera's view. Then another clip showing Caleb at the rental property, the feed mirrored from my hallway. The room went silent. Next came the text threads, the edited videos, the forged medical report, with Darren's signature. A second later, Lillian Pratt's affidavit filled the screen, her shaking handwriting magnified 10 feet tall. Gasps rippled through the tables. Someone dropped a glass. Darren rose from his chair, face draining of color. Caleb reached for the laptop, but Patricia was already there, a quiet wall of resolve. "This is an ongoing investigation," she said firmly to the crowd. "All evidence has been verified." Reporters invited for the publicity began recording. The words "power of attorney fraud" and "elder exploitation" whispered through the air like sparks before a fire. Caleb looked at me then, not as a son looks at his mother, but as a man cornered by his own reflection. His lips moved soundlessly. I closed the clasp on my clutch, straightened the brooch, and walked off the stage as the room erupted behind me. Cameras flashing, voices shouting, the illusion shattering in real time. Outside, the night air was cool, the city lights trembling against the river. I exhaled for the first time in months. Behind me, the truth was no longer mine to guard. It was free now, and there was no taking it back. The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain. Morning light streamed through the high windows, falling across the polished benches like quiet judgment. I sat beside Patricia at the plaintiff's table. Hands folded, the sapphire brooch once again pinned over my heart. Across the room, Caleb stood with his lawyers. His suit hung loose on him now. The confidence had drained away, leaving something fragile and boyish beneath the exhaustion. Renee sat 2 rows behind, her hair pinned too tightly, her face expressionless. Darren Lowe, cuffed and pale, avoided looking anywhere but at the floor. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and clear eyes, called the room to order. Her voice carried none of the drama one might expect. It was calm, almost gentle, and all the more devastating for it. Case number 2476, State of Georgia vs. Caleb, Leland, Renee Leland, and Darren Lowe. Patricia rose to read the summary of evidence financial documents, the edited videos, the forged medical statements, the testimony of Lillian Pratt. Each piece landed like a stone dropped into still water. There was no outburst, no denial, just the quiet rustle of paper and the hum of inevitability. When it was Caleb's turn to speak, he didn't look at me. His voice was steady, but empty, as though he'd rehearsed each word to keep it from cracking. I take full responsibility for my actions. I lost sight of what mattered. The judge listened without expression, then read the verdict. Mr. Lowe, for financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. You are sentenced to 7 years in state prison. Mrs. Leland, for conspiracy and obstruction, 3 years. Mr. Leland, for elder abuse fraud and unlawful surveillance, you have pled guilty. You are sentenced to 5 years with eligibility for early release upon completion of rehabilitation and restitution. The sound of the gavel was almost merciful. Renee wept silently, mascara streaking down her face. Darren swore under his breath as deputies led him out. Caleb didn't move until they touched his arm. Then for the first time, he turned toward me. Our eyes met across the aisle. There was no plea in his expression, no anger either, just a hollow awareness that whatever existed between us had been stripped to its final truth. When he was gone, the silence that followed felt heavier than any verdict. Patricia gathered the papers with practiced care. "It's done," she said softly. But justice, I realized, was never really done. It was a transaction, the restoration of balance paid for, with something irreplaceable. 2 weeks later, the custody papers arrived. I was granted guardianship of Mason, my youngest grandson. The judge cited emotional safety and familial stability. I moved his things into the spare room overlooking the garden. The first night he stood at my doorway clutching a pillow, uncertain. "Can I sleep here tonight?" I smiled and lifted the blanket. "Of course, sweetheart." He climbed into bed beside me, his breathing slow, the way Eli's used to sound when he was little. The house felt quiet again, but not empty. Outside, the wind rustled through the magnolia trees, brushing softly against the windows. For the first time in months, I let myself rest, not as a woman watching her life unravel, but as someone finally free to begin again, even in the silence left behind. The sale went through on a bright morning in early spring. Patricia handled the paperwork, her tone brisk but warm. I signed the final page without hesitation. The old house on Whitaker Street, its walls drilled, its air poisoned with watching, was no longer mine. I thought I would cry, but instead, I felt light, like I'd set down something invisible and heavy that had lived on my shoulders for years. A week later, I stood before my new home, a small blue cottage on Habersham Street, tucked between a pair of magnolia trees and a white picket fence that leaned slightly with age. The river was only a few blocks away. I could smell the salt and hear the gulls. The house needed work, but it was honest work. Paint-peeling porch, sagging the kind of flaws that came from living, not from deceit. Eli showed up that afternoon with Mason and 2 paint rollers. "Grandma, we're doing the back wall first," he announced, already splattered with blue. Mason giggled, running barefoot through the patchy grass, his laughter bouncing off the shutters. We spent the whole day painting. The sun climbed high, and the air smelled of ocean wind and fresh paint. For the first time in months, I didn't feel observed. The house was quiet, in a different way, alive but private. I moved freely through its rooms, speaking to no one but myself, opening every drawer without wondering what lens might be inside. By evening, the cottage glowed pale blue under the soft gold of dusk. Eli stood beside me, hands streaked with color. "You sure you want to do this alone?" he asked quietly. I smiled. "Not alone, just on my own terms." He nodded, and for a moment I saw the same quiet strength that had guided him through the storm. We ate dinner on the porch, grilled cheese sandwiches, simple and perfect. Mason fell asleep, curled on the swing, his hair smelling faintly of paint and sun. Inside, I lit one lamp and turned off every other light. The stillness felt strange but not empty. I realized then how long it had been since I'd lived without performing, without smiling for hidden cameras, without curating every breath for someone else's version of me. The blue walls shimmered faintly in the lamplight, clean and new. The air hummed with quiet, the kind that belonged entirely to me. Evening settled softly over Savannah, the kind of golden calm that seemed to slow the whole city. The river murmured somewhere beyond the oaks, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine and salt. I stood on the porch of the blue house, the paint still new enough to catch the light. Eli had come for dinner, driving in from his first semester of college. Mason darted through the yard, chasing fireflies, his laughter bright against the hum of cicadas. I watched them both, the quiet resilience in one, the unbroken joy in the other, and felt something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time, contentment without fear. Eli set down his backpack on the porch steps and joined me. "Classes are good," he said. "Hard but good. I think Dad would have liked the campus." I nodded, the thought steady rather than painful. He would have. We sat for a while, saying nothing. The sky darkened into indigo, and the first stars blinked awake. When Mason ran up to show us a jar filled with glowing specks, Eli smiled and took his picture, the flash bright and harmless. For once, light didn't feel like intrusion. After they left, I stood alone by the railing. The street was quiet, just the rustle of branches and the distant song of the river. I reached for the switch beside the door and turned on the porch light. Its soft beam spread across the yard, warm and even. There had been a time when that light meant waiting for safety, for rescue, for someone else to make things right. Now it was different. It was mine. A quiet boundary against the dark, steady and sure. I looked toward the city skyline and whispered into the stillness. They told me not to react. I didn't. I planned. The words drifted into the night, gentle and final. Peace, I realized, was its own form of revenge, and it was enough.